Any advice for moms that are either contemplating taking the plunge, starting a business, and not sure when the right time is to focus more on family life versus the right time to start a business and focus more on that?
I don't think that there is a right time to not focus on kids. I think like investing in your family is one of the most incredible things you could possibly do, and you just need to figure out how much of yourself you can give and how much, if that fills your cup, like how much it actually makes you happy. Like I know for me, if I spent 100% of my time at home, I would be like quite miserable. Like for me, it has to be closer to like 30, 40%. Kids continuously need more. So it's not like they hit a golden age of 8 and they don't need you anymore. It's actually like really quite the opposite. So my advice to like any family is like be extremely realistic about what you can afford to contribute in terms of working. Set those parameters and those boundaries, and you also need to like be extremely open with your partner.
Hi, Tali. I'm so excited to have you here with us today. I should say good morning because it's 8 a.m. where you are?
Yeah, it's 8:50.
You're in Australia.
I'm in Melbourne. Yeah, it's raining outside and I'm in my basement. Oy vey. See, just ignore the notifications.
You're a popular lady. That's your day.
Speaking of popular, that's exactly what I was going to bring up, because the first time we met, it was days before our oldest sons were starting preschool in New York City, and they had some weird parent meetup, the kind of thing where you kind of go dragging your feet and you're like, ugh, like, is this really going to be my life from now on? But then I saw you and I was like, intrigued. She's, different and looks creative and cool.
No way.
In a good way.
I saw Alex and I judged her so hard. I was like, oh my God, like, of course they've got like a Victoria's Secret model, like mother in the class.
Right. I'm hating her more as she starts talking because you're like, oh, she is beautiful and she's smart. Give me a break.
And
this free language, just stop.
Yeah, exactly. And then, and I was like, I'm never going to be friends with such like ultra cool people. And then she was like, hey, and I was like, are you talking to me? And she's like, yeah, I do. I was like, wow.
Well, thankfully, one of us was nice enough to talk to the other, right? I knew from that day you'd be my friend. And actually, our sons were best friends from day one of preschool. And it was really cute. And we lived on the same street, you and I. And we also worked in the same industry, which was kind of crazy.
And how did you, getting back to the path of when you met Alex, you had 2 kids at the time, living in, or 1 kid at the time, living in New York City. I would love to understand. And when I met you, right, you had the Tali Roth brand, right? Like your business, your interior design firm was your name. Like I would love to hear when you took the leap, like specific, because what this podcast is really about, right, beyond just talking to really interesting people, is giving our listeners essentially a roadmap of how they can get going with their dreams, get going with their ideas. And so I have a lot of friends, actually, as Alex said before, our very early days, right, was in the interior design world with interior design software. So we know a lot of interior designers, and I know a lot of talented individuals that struggle with the balance of both building a very big firm and being very present parents. So I'd love to dig into that, as well as even taking the leap of building their own firm. One of my dearest friends is an incredible interior designer, and she's too scared of going out on her own. So even the fact of, and that's a huge risk and a huge responsibility and so much workload, especially when you're parents. So even understanding, like, how do you do it as a mom and this big hot shot interior designer with so many very, I'm sure, demanding clients? And how did you even get there? How did you decide to take the leap and build the business under your own name and have it be your business?
Okay. So I'll sort of start at the, so if I leap off to, I went to school, I graduated. Before I could even graduate, there was an opportunity for us to move to America and for my husband or my boyfriend at the time to work in property development, which is where he works, in New York City, which I was like, absolutely, we have to do it. So I barely graduated. Like I missed the ceremony. I missed everything. I submitted all my work and then we were on a plane in like October 2013. So when you ask about like that leap, I think only now as I'm like 30, like getting into like turning 38 soon, can I understand that my delusional, like part of the delusion in me is what works for, you know, what worked for me in running my own business, and that kind of like a little bit spoilt and a little bit selfish. But I also think that there's like, you've got to be true to who you are. Like that is, I wasn't putting that on. It wasn't like a farce. There's plenty of things that I don't feel confident about, but I knew that I couldn't be 1 in 100 at a firm. So like I got to New York City, I was so green because I had not practiced in the field, and like my course was really good and extensive, but it was sort of like across everything. And it wasn't like a 4-year architecture degree where you're sitting on like computer programs all day. So I had a few interviews and I just could so quickly tell that like it was not going to be, I would not shine at all. I just didn't think it would be for me. So someone had mentioned to me this business called Home Polish, which was a startup at the time that was trying to kind of shake up the industry. And what they were doing was essentially like commoditizing interior design and selling it by the hour, like selling us by the hour. So I joined that kind of agency. And that was, I guess, like a big move in me starting my own business, because there was like some sort of safety net to it because it was an agency and it wasn't really my own business per se, but I was basically running my own business. So I got to make a lot of mistakes. Like you make so many mistakes, which I'm still making all the time. But, like I probably did like 70 clients. So you just had this like large turnover of people. So it started with like, I'll never forget like getting on a train from the West Village to Bushwick for a 5-hour job, which I did over 2 visits. Like that was the kind of like nonsensical stuff we were doing. But it meant that like I could get my feet wet. But I will say that like that wouldn't have worked if I was the one that was being relied on as the breadwinner. Like that wouldn't have worked. So I do think that in design, there is an element of like privilege in it. And I'm not saying that like every interior designer is privileged. That's absolutely not true. But the way in which you approach it is, what you bring to the table. And I guess like, if I can like have a positive slant on like having babies while building a business, it meant that there's been so much inefficiency in my business that in terms of like my time, what I've been able to give and investment, like I haven't really invested money into my business ever. So, and that was all tactical because I just didn't feel like it was the time to be having babies and which I know is completely the opposite of the two of you.
That's what you needed. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's very true to me. And if I learned anything from fashion, it was that I didn't want to create something that was inauthentic and that you saw in a magazine, but in reality was not real. And like, that's kind of what makes me giggle sometimes, because there is an element of inauthenticity when it comes to my business, because I have a large Instagram following and I have a really nice portfolio, but I'm still not hugely profitable.
I think it's really interesting. And I'd actually love to tap on that in a sense, because so what you're saying is that you are like an incredible designer to the stars, truly. But the balance that you're doing with your family, right? Like you're not optimizing for like the most efficient business or business model, even, because for you to do that, right, you probably wouldn't actually be able to balance your home life.
Yeah. So if interior design is funny in that like I'm so hands-on that on a project, like you and builders, everything is urgent. So like you need to almost be on call. Like you don't need to be, but you sort of have to be if you want to get certain things done. So, you then to have employees is a whole nother level of like cost and investment in time in training people, which I also didn't want. So it has been the kind of thing where I've accepted the ebbs and flows of the business. Like sometimes I'll have, 4 jobs at once that are really meaty. And then other times, like the past 2 years have been a lot quieter for me, even if it doesn't appear that way, because I've been like hyper focused on raising my kids. And then I'll take on like a short and sharp project that lasts for like 3 months and it's super intense. And I learned that lesson again. Okay, that kind of work structure doesn't really work for my family that well, but it's
And it's part of that privilege that you mentioned previously too, is the flexibility to say, okay, now it's time for me to focus on family life, and I can do that for X amount of time and still have a business and still have a brand.
Yes. It's a privilege, but someone needs to do it. Like someone, I don't have round the clock help, and someone needs to be raising a family, whether it's you, whether it's your partner, whether it's a third party, whether it's another family member. So for us, it's like, it's just the reality of our family structure. So what's privileged is that I can, I've managed to still invest in things, like I still have help, like I still have babysitters a few days a week, and I still have, I'm just doing a website for the first time. Like I just did a Squarespace, whatever, like doing all these things that cost money that I don't really have to spend. So that is the privilege of it. So I've told people that so many times, like other designers that come to me, that if you want to run your own thing, you have to have a sort of like a specific personality type, a little delusional, a little bit, like okay with things being a little out of control. And that's really just not for everybody. There was a lot of people who I studied with or who I work with who were like way more type A and really thrive then in a firm setting. So it depends, like, what you are, who you are, what you want.
How did you build your brand? Like you talk a lot about your social following, and it's so impressive, and you have this incredible brand. And I'm just curious, when aspiring entrepreneurs, right, whether they're designers or whatnot, come to you and say, like, how do I build my brand? How did you do it? Especially a brand that's your name, right? Like it's not even a company name that you can hide behind. Like your brand is you. And I'm just curious, what are your tips for those that are thinking about building a brand?
I think that it's like a hard thing to do, and I think that I don't think it's luck, but I do think I got lucky in the time that I began kind of posting on socials. Like we all know that year, like 2015, 2016, 17, it was a different landscape. Instagram was different, right? So like now my following can really only move like very slightly upward. Whereas then, like if there was a piece of press on me, my following would jump like 1,000 in a day, which just does not happen anymore. So I would say in terms of building a brand, I think be unapologetically you, but I think the biggest thing for designers is photography of your work. And that's really hard for a lot of people to do, because it's really hard to get a job finished. It's really hard to invest in photography. Like I'm in a situation at the moment with a job that finished like over a year ago, and there was 3 different firms involved, and we want it to be like Vogue Living is interested in it, but we have to pay for it. And that's an investment of like $7,000 on a fee that was not that much more than that a couple of years ago, so that is really, that's tough. So photography is really important, showing your work, showcasing your work, posting consistently, having a point of view. But it's not easy. I haven't worked with like these, magicians that are like, this is the way in which it's just kind of trial and error.
And I do think you're very authentic. You're very you. You're very Tali in the way that you present yourself online. You have a personality, and people resonate with that.
Thanks.
How much does your personality actually come out in your brand? Do you ever have to feel like you're hiding it? And how much of like your mom personality, if you even have a mom personality, comes out in that brand?
I didn't really get a mum personality until kid three. Like I didn't like kid one. I was just so me to, and like Phoenix would have to remind me that I needed to take care of him, and then like the three has just shifted that balance completely. But I mean, I post my kids on socials all the time. It's usually the youngest person in the family gets posted a lot until I realize that it's inappropriate, and then I stop. But it's really never to my grid, so it doesn't really like exist forever anywhere. Yeah, how much of my personality? I used to be really good before COVID at posting a couple of times a week, and I would always make like sexual innuendos about interior design, like, oh, this color makes me so wet, I want to kiss it, like dumb things like that. And I mean, people quite liked it apparently. But then I lost the ability to be that funny every day. Just a couple of months ago, I hired a younger woman who runs her own social business here in Melbourne. I think she has like one or two people working for her, and I basically said like I've just got no. I'm too awkward about posting my work. I'm too connected to it. Will you post for me a few times a week, just my pictures of my project? Because I look at the images of my work and I'm like, oh, that's so boring. Like no one wants to see this. I've I've seen it 100 times. So she'll just go in, schedule it all. I have to generally approve it and read the caption. She'll speak in my manner, and then I'll correct anything that's not quite me. If she's like too adoring or too nice or too whatever. And yeah, so that's been really positive. It's not a massive investment in terms of like financials. So I think that if you're growing a business and you're finding it really hard to stay on top of socials, it's definitely a really good thing to do. And it's an easy thing to outsource because there's so many things that you can't outsource. Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about self-doubt, because you mentioned it just now and how you can't see your work anymore. And I'm sure that's not the first time that you feel like that. But was there a specific time where it became so overwhelming that it prevented you from growing?
Honestly, I think kind of like all the time. I don't know if that's ever stopped. In some ways I have like immense confidence in myself. And then in other ways, I think that I'm like a huge failure. I sort of vacillate between the two opinions. I think that because I don't feel confident and across the financials of my business, it's always felt like it prevented me from growing.
Yeah, and so you have lack of confidence in the financials of your business, or being able to navigate that, which you feel is basically a hurdle to growing. What about confidence in your own like aesthetic ability, which you are like truly incredible at? Do you lack confidence there?
Not really. Like I don't feel like I was starting to feel work's been quiet for me in Australia. I was starting to feel a little bit like, do I still have it? Like, can I still put together a cool space? And I feel like that was just kind of normal self-doubt because like I'm feeling a little bit like I need to get my feet wet a bit more than I have been. But no, I have pretty high confidence in my aesthetic abilities. I used to lack confidence in being able to run a job. But I think that that's just my shtick of me talking myself down. I think I can run a job. I don't think I'm as detailed as like a very type A person, but I think that I've trained myself enough, and I think I work hard. So I manage it and I get it done, and I hustle. I definitely think I have a high work ethic, but in terms of making commercial business decisions, it's almost as if like I'm at capacity with other things I'm doing. So I'll give you guys a good example. So a lot of designers charge commission on their product, right? So there's a designer discount of, let's say, 20%. They'll mark that discounted piece up by anywhere from like 15 to 30%. So every firm does it differently, and that is how the designer makes like that additional money on top of their their designer fee. And that requires like a lot of management, a lot of tracking, a lot of know-how. You need to make sure things don't slip through the crack. The best, most efficient way to do it is to invoice them that full amount. Then they pay that. Then you take portion of that and pay. Like, so that is those kinds of things have been just so terrifying to me, that I have really felt like I can't do it.
And how did you overcome this self-doubt specifically around the business side of things? Because it's definitely something we hear a lot, especially from women. One of the blockers to start a business is exactly what you're talking about. How am I going to make money? I don't really know anything about it. It's one of the many things that prevents them from getting going.
Yeah, I think that, so if I had an ideal situation, I would be working with a bookkeeper and an accountant like on a weekly basis, and I'd be getting a lot more of that education.
And what's holding you back from doing that? Is it just you don't have the time or bandwidth?
Yeah, I think like at the moment it's time and bandwidth. And I think that when my youngest is closer to 4 or 5, I'm going to start doing more of that. So I do have to do a bit of self-talk and say, okay, this is a long burn. This isn't like and I've done this throughout having the 3 babies through career, because I've been doing the same thing for 13, 14 years. I have to say, okay, Tali, it might feel right now like things are really quiet or things are too hard or you can't work that much, but you know that it will spike up again, so you just have to do a little bit of that, and also say, I don't have any plan. I'm not doing this, have never even crossed my mind to sell my business. Like, that's not the business model that I'm in. I'm doing this because I love it. And I truly love creating spaces. I like getting paid for that. And I really love what I do. So, those are the things that kind of like help me move through these like uncomfortable feelings of, oh my God, like this, this isn't moving quick enough, or I haven't made enough money this year, or
Any advice for moms that are either contemplating taking the plunge, starting a business, and not sure when the right time is to focus more on family life versus the right time to start a business and focus more on that?
I don't think that there is a right time to not focus on kids. I think like investing in your family is one of the most incredible things you could possibly do, and you just need to figure out how much of yourself you can give and how much, if that fills your cup, like how much it actually makes you happy. Like, I know for me, if I spent 100% of my time at home, I would be like quite miserable. Like, for me, it has to be closer to like 30, 40%. And you've just got to be really realistic about that. Kids continuously need more. So it's not like they hit a golden age of 8 and they don't need you anymore. It's actually like really quite the opposite. So my advice to like any family is like, be extremely realistic about like what you can afford to contribute in terms of, working. Set those parameters and those boundaries. And you also need to like be extremely open with your partner. I mean, I know my husband and I, like, this is the core of like most of our arguments and issues are around this exact topic. It was the first time in our relationship where things weren't even, was once I got pregnant, really. And like, there is no equality, total equality, so it's about, viewing yourself as like a team, and, who's contributing where and how and why and what. But I think we've all been given a very hard task in our world of trying to, firstly, like not ever being able to switch off because of our phones, and like both partners trying to contribute 100% in a work setting and in a home setting. Like, I think we've been given a difficult task. Like, I don't think our parents experienced the same thing as we did.
Absolutely. I agree with that. I think we're all struggling with that phase in our life. We often reflect on it with Lee that you're approaching late 30s, you have 1 or 2 kids or no kids, but you're in that transition in your career, and your parents are aging. It's a lot of transition and a lot of weight to manage. So I can definitely relate to everything that you're saying. And before we wrap up, I would love to hear one last thing from you. If you recently received some piece of advice, maybe from your husband or someone else, that you think our listeners would love to hear about.
When I was just in New York trying to do this job, which I don't know how well I'm doing at it, the one of the women that works for the client, I said to her, "Am I delusional trying to open a store in 8 weeks?" And she said, like, you have to be you have to be delusional in the line of work that we're in, because if you're not, like, nothing will ever get done. And it like, I had never sort of had that, sort of echoed back to me in that way. And I was like, you're right. You have to be delusional until the fat lady sings and says, like, this actually isn't going to happen. And I think that is a cool and important part. The other advice that I'm working on, that's more like business, and then personal, is I still think it's really cute that I'm so self-deprecating, and kind of have been forever. And I also am so aggressively open about everything. And this couples therapist we've been seeing said, you don't have to go around and tell everybody how much you suck and how much two of you suck as a couple. Like, every time you put that out into the world, like, everyone around that is expecting that from you, and you are creating that within your marriage. And so every time I'm about to, it's hard for me to give up on a joke. Like, I think humor is, like, so good and, like, the core of everything. And so I love making people laugh and feel comfortable. And I do that by telling people how horrendous I am, and, like, how, so I'm really working on that.
I love that. Don't be the butt of your own jokes. You are one of the funnier people that I know. So I hope you keep on telling jokes, but I hope you don't remain the butt of your jokes. And I also think, I hope you give yourself more love, because it's really interesting to just reflect on this past call, right? And you do have a lot of, I feel like you don't see yourself in the eyes that everyone sees you in. And it's like, you are this extraordinary designer. And I think interior designer, I think it's really remarkable how you balance both your career and life, and that that you might not want to be full on career right now because you want to be more home. And I think that's a really important message for our listeners, is that you don't have to be all in on everything. You can have your passion project or your work project, and it can be 30% of your day. You can have that other 70% be on your home life, right? But that can still be really invigorating to that day to day. So I think that was really, like, it was powerful for me to hear.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I could spend a whole hour with you talking about parenting, like, with the focus on parenting, because Alex and I we sort of spoke about it when we caught up in March, but, like, there is no one who can, maybe this will get me in trouble, maybe I sound like a dinosaur, but there's no one that can sort of deal with some of the problems that come up in your family with your children as well as you can. And, like, there is a lot of power in kind of accepting that and driving that and taking control over that, and not seeing it as, oh gosh, like, that's stopping me from working, but rather saying, like, and looking at your career, especially if you're running your own business, as, like, as a 40-year timeline. And, for these 2 years, like, I was doing a little bit of that, like, try and imagine yourself being older, looking back and being like, I see what I've achieved over 13 years, and I'm like, oh, wow, that's really awesome. But when you're in the nitty gritty, you can't see that progression month to month. So, yeah.
Yeah, it requires a lot of self-awareness. First of all, where you're saying, like, realizing how much to allocate to this, to that. But like you said, our lives are long, and there's a lot to look forward to, and not everything needs to happen at the same time. We talked about it with Barbara also on our podcast. You can't have it all the time, and that's okay. Just realize what you need to focus on in the moment. Tali, thank you so much for starting your day with us so early in Melbourne. We love you so much, and we're so excited.
Bye.